to our TechBites, dealing with managing performance remotely and protecting employee health, as well as we'll be addressing employees going back to work. With me today are three of my colleagues, Bonnie Gibbon, Dr. Bonnie Gibbon, who specializes in the impact of hardship, and she's a clinical therapist at Family Enterprise Therapy. Gavin Marshall, who's the managing partner at Roper Greyell LLP, who specializes in employment law, and especially from the viewpoint of the employer. And last but not least, Daniel Kassoon, who's a manager at M&P in HR consulting. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this morning. And as I said earlier, I think what's great about the virtual format is the rain is not keeping people from coming to the event. It's much easier to click than it is to come through the pouring rain as it did today. So just a couple of housekeeping matters. Please make sure that you've muted your microphone and keep your camera off. That's of course except for the part for the panelist. Please don't you guys do that. We'll have a question and answer period at the last 15 minutes of the webinar. And I do encourage each one of you to use the chat function as you have questions when you're going through, and then we'll look to answering those at the end. You'll see that chat box onto your right. And we'll answer as many as we can, and then follow up afterwards with if we didn't have a chance to answer. We will be providing the email addresses for Bonnie, Gavin, and Daniel as well. And you will get a recording of this event in a couple of days after the event. So thank you very much for coming. And to start off, we're going to start off with our fireside chat. And as I said, then we'll go to live questions and answers for the last little bit. So this topic has been very much in the forefront. And just today in the paper, the Wall Street Journal had a section that talked about goodbye open office, hello dynamic workplace. So for the HR specialist, that's your new lingo, the dynamic workplace. And there was another article that says, while working remotely, how to get noticed and promoted. In BC Business, it was, will working from home sink the office market? They don't seem to be concerned. The real estate players don't seem to be concerned. It's all about making work relevant and coming to the office. And in Fast Company, they added that employees have added as much as 40% more time to their work days. And I do question how much of that is productive, and that's some of the things we're going to be talking about. But sort of to frame and to start the discussion, I would like each of the panelists to comment sort of at 10,000 feet how the pandemic has impacted your specific work area. And Bonnie, can I start with you?
For me specifically, it's actually been quite beneficial, because instead of going to the office and doing face-to-face, I've been able to do a lot of work from the leisure of my home. And it's interesting with my work in particular, I'm always watching the face, the eyes, because the face tells a very big story. And so I can actually ask my clients, can you get a little closer to the video or the what's it called? The
camera.
The camera, thank you. Can you get a little closer to the camera as you're speaking to me? So for me, it's been advantageous.
Actually, when Bonnie says that, I'm like, okay, but
just a little closer, if you don't mind. Thank you.
What about you, Gavin?
Well, I sort of wear two hats sitting on this panel. One is, of course, as a subject matter specialist in employment law, and the other one is as a managing partner of an enterprise of about 75 people, 40 lawyers, and about almost as many staff. So we have it's been transformative for our organization. It has been it is starting to be transformative in the area of employment law. There are challenges that the law will have to address and will have to face as our workplaces evolve as a result of the impact of the pandemic. Working from home is obviously a good example of that. We haven't fully worked through all the implications of that through the law and what it might mean. There are traditional canons of law that will come to bear on it, but they will, decisions will be made and new principles will evolve on a case-by-case basis. And as an organization with an office environment here, we're dealing with, and I've are right on the cutting edge of some of the experiences that all of us are facing in offices environments, trying to optimize this new work environment, and wondering, like everybody else is, to what degree it will be permanent, to what degree the changes will transform the way we do work in the future. So we're all on that bleeding edge now.
And Dan, what about you?
Yeah, similar to Gavin, right? In terms from the HR standpoint and working through with our clients on it, a lot of this is new, right? And with that shift around March 17th, if you didn't have storefront, almost your workforce being at home, now moving to hybrid models, right? And where's this pendulum ultimately going to end up with where folks are working? What this looks like. From the HR standpoint, we're needing to rethink and look into some of this, performance management, not just pop down into the office. You need to rethink how you onboard. You need to rethink how you recognize and reward, right? So as an HR professional, and like most people that would be in this webinar, needing to rethink how we've done things traditionally and push ourselves outside our comfort zone. And what does this look like for our company? I'll leave it there at the 10,000 foot, but it's transformative, I think is the right word there, Kevin.
Okay. So a couple of things that, that article said that people are working 40% more. It does make you wonder about the impact on productivity. And there's one specific issue. There's a number of apps that are coming out and talking about monitoring your employees and to address, what are the legal impacts of monitoring your employees? Let's say there's an app that's in the background that's keeping track of how much time they spend on social media compared to actual working. And, how does that impact psychologically an employee when they know that they're being monitored? How do you communicate that? So if I can get you guys to unpack that, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
So Bonnie, why don't you start?
Actually, we now know, if you've watched the documentary Social Dilemma, it shows how Google Analytics will watch everything that we're doing on the computer all the time. And it's interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if Google comes up with some type of app that allows an employee to tap into, like to log into their company system. And so when they're working for the company, they're in the company system working away. And if I want to now go and do some social networking or something non-work related, then I just log out. And so I know that when I'm logged into the company system, that I can be watched, I can be observed. And then when I log out, it's my personal private time, even if I'm on the company computer.
So Gavin, from a legal right to monitor,
Yeah,
privacy versus, right?
And as we've when we were having a sort of our preparatory talk, a few weeks ago, I realized how this is just a classic example in the law of how we're entering terra incognita, like an undiscovered country. In the area between workplace privacy and monitoring. There are a few cases and sort of a little bit of guidance that existed before, but the area of monitoring work performance or supervision between workers and their managers is going to have to evolve, and it will rapidly evolve. first answer to the question, do employers have a right to oversight of employees who are working remotely? Yes, they do, but that's a qualified yes. Do they have a right to monitor productivity? Yes, they do. Do they have a right to surveillance of their employees? Probably not, and probably not in the way that one might think is on the intrusive end of that scale. Employees have you know, or the law of privacy has established a reasonable expectation of privacy, even in the workplace, and that the parameters of that are defined by things like privacy laws. In at least 3 of the provinces, Quebec, Alberta, and British Columbia, have specific privacy laws that include workplace privacy. The federal law is a little bit different, the law out of Ottawa. Those provide general guidance and parameters for how employee supervision might be conducted, and establish that reasonable expectation of privacy through a variety of statutory provisions. The other area is policies, right? An employer can create policies that provide clarity about what the expectations of the employee should be when they're performing company work on company time, especially with company equipment. A third variable in that, or factor to consider, is whose infrastructure are you using? The expectation of privacy around when using a infrastructure that is your own might be different than if you're tapping into or using a corporate piece of equipment. So those are 3 variables that are going to impact on privacy, the privacy issue going forward. But let me give you an appetizer, just a little taste of how precedents in the past may impact how the lens through which the law may see workplace privacy in an employee's home when they're working from home. There was a case out of I think it was out of the credit union movement in British Columbia some years ago, that dealt with video surveillance. And of course, in a bank branch or a financial institution, video surveillance is very important for security, right? Because if somebody comes in and tries to pass the note and do a bank robbery, you want to have each and every individual who enters the branch being on video surveillance, and they are. You can see multiple cameras at any bank branch that you go into. The challenge in that case was that the video surveillance monitors, the cameras were pointed down and into the work areas, and the complaint, or the question was, is that necessary for the purpose for which the surveillance is being conducted? And the answer was no. Those surveillance cameras are entitled, or the employer is entitled to have surveillance cameras for specific purposes, but not necessarily in order to remotely monitor each and every time an employee, brushes their hair, puts on lipstick, or picks their nose. And so that balance there's some glimpses in the law about the way that balance. Imagine, take that principle, or the rudiments of that principle, and apply it to the private workspace, the home workspace. Can you see what's on somebody's screen, or can you monitor what they're doing in terms of number of calls that they're taking, or productivity issues? Perhaps, as long as there's sort of informed notification and consent of those things, and that's transparent. Could you monitor what they're doing during their workday in and around their home? Probably not. And so the balance will be struck along principles like that. Not that that's sort of determinative or anything, what I just said.
Well, that's a great segue to Dan to talk about how you put that in your HR policies.
Well, yeah, and to step back from that too, where I like to start with that is the why, right? Because there's a corporate culture piece that you need to consider too with any type of productivity monitoring that comes in. And I mean, to Gavin's point, okay, looking through and being, principles of transparency and communication, like you need to have that change management plan in place of what you're going to do here, right? And if it's monitoring calls, whatever that might be from a productivity standpoint, that's one thing. But as Gavin was mentioning, okay, camera on in your home, well, that's going to be a completely different different discussion, because as people have, abruptly needed to work from home, I'm still not confident that folks have workstations set up appropriately. Like, you go through and you start monitoring, well, you're seeing into my living room, you're seeing into my kitchen, you're seeing into my bedroom, potentially, right? Like, not everybody has a dedicated office space at home. So from a culture standpoint, and why are we doing this, right? We need to start there, so that we don't trust that our employees are being productive. Do we actually have metrics that show we're being less productive at home? Because article after article is saying folks are having a tough time turning off, right? They're working longer. Longer doesn't always mean more productive, because there's a burnout element there. And, there's studies that show the longer you work, productivity can go down. But there's pieces there that we need to consider from a monitoring standpoint and starting. And Katri, to your point in your question on how do we implement the policy side of it, well, one, we need to make sure that there's legislative compliance with what we're doing. But we can go through and write policy, have our scope of who it applies to, but we need to carefully think out what we're trying to achieve here and the why. And then to Gavin's point, we need to communicate that policy. We need to give folks enough heads up, but reasonable time to implement it. So you can go through, for me, I'm big on communication. Start with the why, what's our purpose, communicate that.
So Bonnie, if an employee knows they're being monitored, what can that do to them?
Well, it depends on the individual. There are some individuals that love to be watched, right? Look at the good job I'm doing, or can you see how hard I'm working? And then there's other ones who, if they're working alone and they're a people person, they will feel that they can't concentrate and they can't focus, because often if they're more of an extrovert, they need that interaction with other people to motivate themselves. And so if they feel that they're being watched and they're like taking a long time to figure things out and their concentration is looking at the fly on the wall, and they will not want to be watched at all. So it totally depends on the individual.
Yeah. And so how do you wrap that into your legal and your HR? You end up having policies. It's not one policy fits all, really, almost to the point.
Well, and Gavin raises a good point, the actual video surveillance, right? But if we can monitor productivity as to, as they're inputting, and really, it really does come down to productivity when it comes to an employer. Are you getting the job done in order for us to capitalize? If you can't get the job done, then that's when we need to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. So that brings us, you were mentioning working from home. And so we have two things. So from a company perspective, you're working from home, you've got your corporate materials, client materials. How do you then address the company and customer proprietary information and safeguards? What do you need to do there? Are you going to have, I'm sorry, client, I can't give you what you need because my dog ate my homework, kind of concept. So how do companies manage that aspect? Gavin?
Interesting one. What employers, in a way, that question, I think, is sort of old wine in new bottles, in the sense that while the circumstances in which information is being shared or distributed are slightly different, going to the home environment or perhaps people's home or personal devices, electronic devices, the principles remain the same. Duties of confidentiality exist. They can be made more robust by express agreement, confidentiality agreements, IP-related agreements, non-competitions, non-solicits, and things like that. Those contractual documents that can be appended to or indeed form part of an employment agreement. So, and those obligations can extend, and do now extend to, regardless of where that information may be stored by the individual employee. So I think that's a manageable portion of it. The practicality, of course, is when push comes to shove, and I've seen this many times in litigation where it's difficult or awkward to demonstrate that somebody's engaged in a breach of those promises that they've made over proprietary information. But that's a problem of evidence for the lawyers. In terms of an obligation between employees and employers, that commitment can still be made and ought to be expected to be honored.
Yeah, and just one piece to add into there from a confidentiality standpoint. One area that doesn't get a lot of focus because it's not overly sexy is records management, right? And how long you can keep documents, what actually falls under record management. So for me, with employees moving to working from home, even in the office, I find that's an area where there's not a lot of education because it is an administrative process, right? So, for me in HR, well, yeah, I see all kinds of confidential information or forms or whatever that may be coming across my desk or virtually, right? When I started my career, back 06-ish, around there, right? There was all the talk, digital workplaces, paperless, all this. Well, it's 2020, there's still paper, right? You still have things floating around. So for organizations, having a good records management policy or just educating your staff on what's confidential, what isn't, it goes a long way as an employer to ensure that you don't have those breaches. We're working from home now. How do we securely shred? There's some practical policy pieces and procedures that we need to be having conversations with, which also alleviates anxiety from our staff, knowing, okay, here's what I do with this, because if I don't know, that could cause some anxiety or lead to a breach of confidentiality.
That's let me just add to that, Daniel, because it's a really interesting point that from the administration standpoint. So where I work from my dining room table after the kids are gone, I have 2 bags for paper garbage, because I am not willing to recycle or otherwise dispose through the municipal waste system confidential client documents that I may have printed out for my own convenience. So what do I do with those? I have a brown paper bag, and I stuff them into the brown paper bag. And when I go to the office once a week, I bring the brown paper bag back and I put it through the confidential shredding. So that's a great observation, that there's got to be administered, and what it doesn't impact to one iota the promises that employees have made around confidentiality. But what, to your point, Daniel, what it does impact is maybe a reminder to employees that if you're dealing with confidential materials, you've got to take special care in their disposal, because there's the retention obligation that employers have. So, yeah.
I mean, I would think it extends to even leaving materials on your desk that a family member, whoever can see, and or being on a Zoom call, and having your family walk behind you and hear what you're talking about. Or in my case, my dog always barks because he gets confused because he hears voices. But unfortunately, dogs can't talk, so at least I don't think they can. So we're good with that. So now that we're in this space where people are starting to come back to the office, I think that the initial shock of COVID for the first 6 months or so has kind of worn us down, or we've learned to be resilient with it, and people are looking to coming back to work, and that causes a whole bunch of issues. The whole open office concept is now gone. As we said, I think it was called dynamic workplace, and what does that look like? And so does an employer have a right to demand for an employee to come back? So let's assume this is not where you actually have to work, obviously, from the office. So does an employer have a right to demand? And how do you manage encouraging staff? And what does that do to the psychology of a person who's being asked to come back?
Who do you want to start?
Well, let's start with Bonnie. Yeah.
Well, if I can say, it's important for human beings to have choice. As soon as you give choice, then all of a sudden their brain has some place to go, okay, I can do the pros and cons of this and I can do the pros and cons of that. But as soon as you say, you must do this, and the person is full of anxiety, they're going to feel like they're a rat in a cage, or they're pushed into a corner. And the natural human response, as soon as they feel pushed, is to be defensive and then to come back, like aggressively. And so as an employer, you're now going to have to deal with this aggression, this anger. You can't make me, that type of thing. But if you can give choice, and Katri, you had a perfect suggestion. The staff, first staff who come back, what did you say? They get a dedicated spot.
Well, those who are willing to work a certain number, commit to coming to the office a certain number of days, have a dedicated spot, and those who are coming 2 days or less are what we call hoteling. So they just take an available desk that they feel safe at. Yeah.
Right. So again, human nature, there's that competitiveness, because the nicer dedicated spot is a sign of prestige, or what's that word? Where the status, thank you, hierarchy and status. So all of a sudden, if you can create choice and option that allows that type of one freedom, and then give a little perk to those people who come back, if you really need your staff back at the office, if you can give that incentive, then it's a lot more easier than, like I said, the demanding.
Right. So Gavin, so a right to demand coming back, a right to refuse. Right?
Right. So the outline of this is from a legal standpoint, is a yes but, and I know people hate lawyers who say yes but, or on the one hand or the other hand, but it is still a yes but, and I'll get to both the yes and the but. But to your point, Bonnie, it's interesting. I was reading an article, the Economist piece that I was mentioning that came out about a week or two ago. Bloomberg, the business news wire and organization, is starting in July or August, started paying employees who elected to return to their office or in London, in its London office, a supplement of $75 a day, about £55. So you're already seeing that how do we overcome that reluctance without saying exactly what you just said, Bonnie? You shall return to work, which puts people in a corner. Having said that, we got to divide the workforce here, when we're thinking about it, into employees who had the luxury of working from home or remotely in the first place, and that's about. The estimates are about 40% of the workforce. A study in April 2020 out of the University of Chicago, they started crunching the numbers and sort of gave the estimate about 40% of the workforce could legitimately do from the kitchen table what they were doing in their former work environment. So we're not talking about everybody, and there are our clients included, large numbers of people who have grounded out through thick and thin through this experience that we've had. So when we're talking about returning to work, we're talking about I'd say 40 to probably half the workforce. Can we require those individuals to return to work? Well, it's a term of a condition of employment under ordinary circumstances that those people work from an office environment. So we have an expectation that people will return to work, but that's the yes. That you can require people to return to work. But the but is very important right now, because the public health officer combined with WorkSafe BC, even though we're in phase 3 and maybe going back to 2.5 or 2 in a few weeks, has said that if you can work from home and remotely, you should. And so that guidance has been transformed into WorkSafe BC specific guidance around what a safe work environment looks like. And because of the requirements around a safe work environment in this pandemic, then it's a numbers game. So we've transformed our expectations, and we have not modified them significantly since about April. We've just 2-3 weeks ago did an uptick of the numbers that we were willing to have in the office in order to ensure that social distancing could be maintained. So there's other exceptions. So that's one enormous exception. There's other exceptions for people who have underlying health conditions. So in terms of mental health, which is a sort of a topic that we're going to a theme of today, that if someone has an underlying health condition and you're sort of pushing them in order to try and have them return to work, or if you have somebody has an elderly, vulnerable person at home that they have to care for, who's at risk if they contract the virus, then the circumstances are changed, and to demand categorically that they're the same as everyone else raises the specter. I'm not comfortable saying that it's a human rights violation, but it does raise human rights considerations around discrimination on the basis of family status, required caregiving, as well as disability. So those are the legal things in the back of the mind that people like Daniel will have to turn their minds to when they're looking across the board and ensure they're not making a blanket demand. You all must return to work on Monday. It's not going to work for a little while, although it will work eventually once we get through this, if that's the way that people will go. But as we've just talked about for a long time, the ship is kind of leaving the dock on that in terms of societal expectations, productivity expectations, and opportunities that employers have, which is what the transformative impact of this is going to be. So, Daniel, I don't know if you have sort of, there's another piece of it around the right to refuse unsafe work under occupational health and safety law, but that's another specific area.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, Gavin, to earn Bonnie's points, where that forcing just, hey, Monday we're all returning to the office. Well, good luck. You're going to get pushback. I mean, you're going to get folks chatting to what's the legal precedent there and what you can do, as Gavin just alluded to some of it, right? So a big piece that we're working through on the people management side, I get it. Businesses have office space. Commercial office space is not cheap, right? There's business impacts to that decision from a profitability standpoint, right? And you have these places vacant. Like they say dynamic workplace, right? That's what we're shifting to. I take that as we have some folks at home, some folks in the office, because I look at our office right now, there's maybe 3 of us in here out of 20. It's not that dynamic, right? But within that, and having folks return to the office, you need, again, change management will be a bit of a theme that I talk about. We need to talk to our employees, right? So a lot of things that employers are doing, okay, well, let's outline, again, start with the why. Where are we at right now? Let's be honest with our employees. Transparency, if we've learned nothing through the pandemic, listening to Dr. Bonnie Henry, right? Transparency goes a long way with your employees. So if we can talk about, okay, where are we at, right? Where are we at as a business? Some people are going to want to come back. Some people aren't. Let's list a few questions asking, okay, are there any barriers to you returning? It could be public transportation. Some folks might rely on public transportation to come in and they're not comfortable with it. Okay, let's talk through that, right? So you're going to send this out en masse, but you're going to have an individualized conversation almost with each one of your employees with 4 or 5 questions about, okay, what would make you comfortable returning? Here's what we're doing as an employer to ensure a safe workforce. Because I reside in BC, WorkSafe BC has a reopening guidelines and, basically a package they can come through and audit your business on how to come in, right? Or do we have hand sanitizer at appropriate places? Vectors, high touch areas, what are we doing there? So again, listing all of this for your employees, how you're responding to this, trying to create that safe environment to get some folks to come back will go a long way. But not everybody during the pandemic will agree to come back for various reasons, as Gavin had mentioned as well, right? So we really need to go through and ask our employees versus just demanding them to come back. Okay, how comfortable are you with this? Here's what we're doing as an employer. And, is there any other accommodations we need to do here? Because last point on that, even that hoteling piece, Katri. Okay, hoteling, I mean, anyway, we've been talking about it. I'm a consultant. I'm on the road quite a bit. Do I need a dedicated office day in, day out? Probably not. But how's that being cleaned, right? If we're sharing workspaces during a pandemic, we need to think through that and be very upfront with our employees about their safety.
Well, we had a case where we have a person going around our office who, I don't know how many times a day she comes and cleans my door handle, which is usually always open. So I kind of laugh. In fact, through March and April and May, I was the only one here. And so this person would rotate, and they cleaned the door frame of the door that goes out to the hallway so much that they stripped the wax off. And so now the door doesn't close properly. So there's the extremes. But it does bring an interesting point. So let's say you have two employees who are doing the same job. One works extremely well from home, and the other one is their productivity's down. Really, that they would be much better coming to the office. So Bonnie, as an employer, how would you psychologically manage that you're having to treat two people very differently and have different demands of them?
And this is a really good point. And what I've previously expressed, you're going to have different personalities. And, the simple division of introvert versus extrovert, and then add on the person who's a people person versus a data person. And the data person would rather give me the information, let me work on it, let me work alone so I can focus and concentrate. That person, stay at home. Have that space to get all that work done and have amazing productivity. But the other individual who needs the support of other people. And so how do you entice that person? Because here's the clincher. The individual who needs other people, they will be more apt to have more anxiety around things like the coronavirus, right? What if I get it? And what if I give it to that person? And so as an employer, you already have a taste for your employees. Oh, Fred, he's really good. He can work on his own by himself. But Jack, no, he needs the people contact. And so when you're speaking to each individual, you sort of direct them the way you would like them to follow you. So I don't want to use the word manipulation, but you're an employer and you have certain needs for your company. So you might have to manipulate, or let me use the word massage, the conversation to encourage them to do what's best for you. So if Fred is great working on his own, you don't have to have another office space for him. You can actually start to decrease the amount of office space you need, because COVID showed you that you don't need all this office space. You can have staff working at home and it works. And so you're going to start decreasing your overhead while increasing your productivity. But Jack, whose productivity has plummeted, you can tell that he's anxious. You're wondering if he's now becoming depressed. So how do you entice him back to the office if he's feeling anxious about the COVID? Well, I then say, have some self-responsibility, right? If I'm concerned about germs in my office, then here, Katri said about the door wiping. I do that. I totally understand about pathology and pathogens. So I'm wiping my door myself. Or if there's a seat that I'm sitting on, I'll wipe the seat down. And so you ask your staff to also have some accountability for their needs too.
So take charge of their own condition, almost.
You don't want to say take full charge, because we're a team here. We care. And this is the thing, employers, because it's great. I'm so glad there's so many employers on the TechBite with us today, is that you want to have compassion. You want to show, that phrase, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. And if an employee doesn't think you care, then the conversation's not going to go well. But if you can show some compassion, some empathy about what they're going through, then the conversation will be a lot easier for you. And that's really the key. How do you get what you want as an employer? How do you get what you want in the easiest way? Because I do want to acknowledge, employers, the stress level for you guys is so high right now. All of a sudden, you just had your normal job, which was stressful, and then all of a sudden you have to deal with all of this. And I'm quite sure each of you, your anxiety and your stress level is like maxed out.
Yeah, and a piece there just from, you know, those conversations and having two, you know, to oversimplify the dichotomy, two different types of employees who might be comfortable returning and not, right? Or that individual struggling working at home, and we see it. You know, to add to that employer list where, you know, my HR advice there is, again, when we're in an office environment, we can have quick pop-ins, we can have quick check-ins, right? And now that we move virtually, I mean, you're putting more thought and effort into managing your employees, or I would suggest you should be, on check-ins. How are things going? And you might be doing that at the team level, but are we doing that at the individual level? Because what I might say as an employee in my team meeting, yep, you know, thumbs up, things are good. Yeah, it's, you know, things are all right. It feels like Groundhog Day a little bit, right? Going through and coming through work. Okay, well, team meeting, great, but if we had individual check-ins on how employees are doing, right? And just spending, you know, a little bit, if it's depending how big your team is or what the needs of your team is that once a week, every other week, because we meet as a group. And I've noticed that with my team, we're meeting more as a group virtually. But, you know, are we taking the time to individually talk with individuals? How are you doing through this? Where are your anxieties? You know, if returning to the office space, you know, what does that think? How does that do for you? Because you have folks who you know would need to be in the office and would thrive, but they might be pulled back. And if they're, to Bonnie's point, that extrovert, and now they're a little bit more introverted in their meetings, well, that's a trigger, right? You know your employees. Follow up with that individual, and you can ask the question. You can always ask, how's it going, right? And then start to work your plans to that.
Daniel, if I might suggest, if I'm having a conflict with my supervisor, and so Daniel, if you're my supervisor and you say to me, well, how's it going? And I don't really believe that you have my best interest at heart, that's when your suggestion of sending out a questionnaire of like 4 questions, however you want to word that, a person will share more to a non-entity than to somebody they don't trust. So one suggestion might be, if you don't have that rapport, or as the employer, you actually don't have the EQ to do that. I mean, that's the scary thing. We're now asking these employers to, hey, connect, have compassion with your employees. And they're going, I don't want to do that. Then send them a questionnaire to find out how they're doing.
So now we're dealing with people potentially being sick and revised sick policies. What are we seeing from Gavin? How are companies changing their sick policies? Number of days you get paid, if you get suspected COVID, confirmed COVID.
I haven't seen a tremendous swell of specific changes to corporate sick policies. What we have to identify without leaving this topic, though, is that the government has changed its sick policy. We now have, what's it called? We're on Saturday, so 4 days from now, the famous CERB is coming to an end, but it's not being eliminated in the sense that it's being replaced with other programs. And 2 of those programs, one of them is the Canadian Recovery Benefit, which looks surprisingly like the CERB, with certain other criteria. Of course, there's also EI, but the Canada Recovery Benefit is for those people who aren't eligible for EI. They don't fit the criteria. But we also have created, starting September 27th, which I think is Sunday, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, which gives you $500 a week for 2 weeks if you have a COVID-related illness, and the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit if somebody in your life requires some kind of care that's related to COVID. So I don't want to go into the details of that, but there has been, that is a sea change to our federal government, through a new government program, is entertaining the idea of covering people for periods of illness. Whether that is baked into a renewed EI program, we are probably perhaps even finding out as we speak right now, because of course there's a throne speech being delivered as we speak, which may actually be speaking to things like guaranteed income, guaranteed minimum income, or other kinds of a basket or umbrella of benefits for individuals who require them, which may include some form of paid sick leave on a more permanent basis. So we'll see how that evolves. That's part of the transformation that our society is going through right now, like it or not. Employers who have had sick leaves, I think, are honoring them and stretching them to accommodate circumstances and situations that they face. Employees who are being laid off or let go, I am finding, broadly speaking, employers going to their benefits carriers and saying, come on, is there something you can do, right? If benefits might not necessarily have been technically eligible, or employees might not have been technically eligible through a period of layoff, or even a period of notice leading to termination. Benefits carriers, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they're interpreting their rules to the extent they can in order to extend benefits as it's possible to do so.
And a follow-up piece I have on that, and Gavin, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this too, where we're seeing some employers put in, temporary policies, I'll call them, around, okay, to get us through the pandemic, we want, as an employer, to give, maybe we're providing a paid day or two of sick leave now, but we're providing unpaid leave, if you become ill. And part of that's in response to where we are, because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Gavin, did the courts, and I use that loosely, being non-legal, but COVID can be viewed as a disability, and you need to provide accommodation to employees who have come down with COVID. You can't let them go during that, and there's around that, you need to be accommodating, let folks be at home. So I do see employers putting in, okay, we're going to offer some type of sick leave. It might be unpaid, but we're going to do this, it was put in initially in March or April or May as a temporary policy. And I'm just interested to watch the change, if that's going to become more permanent. And we're going to see, especially with smaller employers where you might not have a dedicated HR policy manual, where we're seeing some of this being developed. So, I'm starting to see that, but that temporary piece that worries me a little bit as an HR professional, because you set precedents, and although it's a great practice, you should do it. I'm interested to see when we come on the other side of this, if folks try to renege on that.
Yeah. No, I'm sure employers are doing lots of things on an ad hoc basis that are the right thing to do now, and also from a retention perspective. But if they translated them into permanent policies, they'd be sort of, starting to break into a cold sweat around the cost.
Yeah, bit of a Pandora's box for benefits. Yeah. So, of course, now we're dealing, as we talked about, 40% of the people coming back to the office. The other 60% are staying home. What if you have to fire somebody? How do you manage that remotely? Do you mandate that they come back to the office? Like, psychologically, what is it like? You're on a game show like we are, and our little Brady Bunch here. You're fired, right? You gotta, like, how does an employer manage that?
I forgot about Hollywood Squares. Thank you, Ken, for reminding me of the trip down memory lane, isn't it? Daniel,
I can now look down at Gavin.
I must confess, not that I've never terminated anyone, but I don't typically terminate people. I advise on what should be done in terms of the paper, and then I fight about it afterwards. But Daniel, you're in a good position to approach that.
Yeah, and it depends where you're at with your workforce, right? Like if we're all working remotely, you know, are you going to call somebody out of the blue into the office to let them go? Probably not. But there's a bunch of things you need to do beforehand with that, right? Like any good process determination, if I can put it that way, you still need to do your prep, right? You still need to go through, as Gavin said, talk to your employment lawyer. You know, is this person, are they a long-term employee? Have they been on temporary layoff? Now we've come to the end of that and we need to let them go, right? And if we didn't pay them to begin with, we still need to offer them a severance or whatever that looks like. And Gavin can speak more to that side of the fence of it. But you still need to follow good process, right? And I equate it to, we still need to treat individuals with dignity, and you can do that remotely via, you know, calls, but you need to really think it through. Does the employee have some property of the employers that you need to get back? And, you know, we need to go through and manage that by, okay, let's make a list of, have we tracked their assets when it was the free for all, the wild, wild west of just grabbing office equipment to bring home to set up our workplaces? Do we know what our employees have at home? If that answer is no, I would suggest getting on that now from an asset management standpoint, right? But we need to take those factors into consideration. We still want to write out our script of being, you know, direct to the point of letting folks go. You can do it virtually, right? I mean, for me, I like the idea of face-to-face, right? I equate it to dating. You're going to break up with someone over text. Probably shouldn't do that, right? But in the environment we have today, I mean, there's legitimate safety reasons of not coming face to face to have that conversation, right? So we can still plan it out, and then we need to be mindful of, okay, here's the processes. Let that information sink in. Here's how we're going to get, you know, your laptop or whatever that is. You know, we still need to be on the IT side of having that security pieces locked down. So again, you need to have your checklist done because you can't manage that reaction from home. But we need to get on it very quickly about what folks have and how we're going to go pick that up. So short answer is yes, you can do it over, you know, via video, because it looks even more suspicious being out of the blue. Hey, haven't seen you in 7 months. Come into the office.
So Bonnie, your comments on
Daniel, that's a good point about online dating and dating. Here's the thing. How many people, if we surveyed them, said they broke up with a person via a text? And I'd say you'd see a lot of individuals who do that. So that, and the only reason for that is to avoid confrontation, right? And so, yeah, if I'm your employee and you called me into the office and said, well, just wanted to let you know we're going to let you go, I'd be going, you called me all the way in from Maple Ridge to have this conversation? You know, I'd even be more mad. No, one, I'm mad that you fired me, and two, that you know, inconvenienced me to do it. So the other thing is, maybe you could coordinate it so that when you're doing the virtual conversation, you have a staff member waiting at their door, and you text them, say go, and they knock on the door, say, and now we're going to pick up your office equipment, because the pink slip, you'd get your pink slip, and then the next thing you know, some security guard is putting all your stuff in a box and pushing you out the door. So, I mean, I'm trying to be funny here, but
yeah, but you just need to rip the Band-Aid off really quickly.
Yeah, just, you know, have that, do it with respect and dignity, face to face. But here's the thing, most people fire themselves, right? Because you've done the evaluations, you've done the productivity, they haven't met certain standards. And then it's their third warning, and say, okay, you know, and you just review that, saying, you know, we had this, we did this, and unfortunately, you haven't made any changes. So we have to let you go.
So Gavin, do you see a rise in lawsuits for wrongful dismissal as a result of COVID? Are you expecting a wave?
Oh yeah. But let me just break this down a little bit. First of all, to union and non-union work environments. There is a concept in. Can you guys still see me? The screen just changed for me. I'm not sure why.
Okay, it's changed for me too. Yeah.
We can hear you.
There's a concept called frustration of contract in employment law and in contract law, where the contract comes to an end through no fault of either party. And what we saw at the very beginning of the pandemic, when public health orders were flying around, were a few instances of what could arguably have been described as frustration of contract. Good example would be casinos. Casinos were shut down by order of the public health officer. And there were plenty of non-union employees in those environments who simply, you know, I'm not saying that their employment was terminated, but the contract was in law frustrated. And now they may still have jobs because the employer decided to hang on. But if they had, that's the kind of classic example where the intervention of a government authority by order, in this case, ends the performance of work, and therefore the contract could come to an end. Then there's layoffs that are the economic knock-on effect of the pandemic. So it's not the public health issue, it's the economic consequences of the public health issue. A classic example would be an airline. And an airline has unionized and non-union employees. Unionized employees in both federal and provincial jurisdictions typically have an entitlement to notice. Certainly in British Columbia, there's a Section 54 of the Labor Relations Code, which gives the employees 60 days notice if a change occurs. And there are legal consequences if that 60 days, if an employer is unable to provide that 60 days notice. So there are all kinds of consequences from layoffs that we've seen. There are consequences for termination of employment under the general law of employment for non-union employees. And the obligation, unless there's a contract and subject to sort of statutory minimums, is to provide an employee with reasonable notice. But reasonable notice is not diminished by the fact that, oh, it's economic hard times on the part of the employer, so we don't have as much of an ability to pay severance pay or to provide a long duration of working notice. The courts will look at that and say, well, it's economic hard times, and that tends to lengthen the amount of time that it takes the employee to find another job. And so when you're terminating someone's employment without cause because of absence of work or economic conditions, many small and mid-sized businesses are feeling those pinches. You don't get a lot of leeway to change the general principles of law that apply, at least not yet, from our courts. And as economic circumstances, if they continue to deteriorate in 2021, and we have further sort of layoffs and downsizings, we're going to start to get an increased number of legal disputes arising from those changes. There's no doubt about that. We saw the initial swarm of that work work on our desks here at Roper Greyell in the months of April, May, and June. And hopefully we don't, but we may well see it coming in 2021.
Well, thank you. I know that kind of leaves us on a harsh note. Thank you very much to the presenters again. There were a number of questions as well as the questions you posed when you were signing up. So hopefully we've answered lots of those. If there are questions that you would specifically like to address to any of the presenters, not me as the moderator, obviously, please reach out to them directly. And as we said, this recording will be sent to you in a couple of days via email. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Katri.
Thanks. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Bye, Dan.